Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this December 14th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Time, Monday through Friday. They also play the show at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, and if you can't get it there, like I always tell you, go to my long-standing website, arcticbeacon.com, arcticbeacon.com. You can get shows going back over a decade regarding the Vatican-led New World Order, all its ramifications, and how the mainstream media and most of the alternative media turn a blind eye to what this institution is all about. It's satanic, and today, before I get to my main topic, which is going to be kind of putting this Pizzagate thing into perspective regarding really where it comes from, why it's here right now, and going back to a couple interviews I did with Jim Rothstein, a New York police detective, regarding child trafficking and these huge pedophile rings that go all the way to the doorstep of the Vatican, and nothing's changed. Now, also, I'm going to get into a letter sent to me by Randy Engel. Now, Randy he's an author, or a journalist, and an expert on pedophilia and homosexuality in the Vatican. And he wrote an open letter to the Pope, which is quite interesting, in 2013, and it has a relationship to Pizzagate. So we're going to get to that. But before I do, let's start off with my Jesuit quote of the day. And if to be absolutely accurate, my Jesuit quotes today, because there'll be two. And then I just want to comment on one of them. First one's from Edmund Paris. He's the author of the book, The Secret History of the Jesuits. And Edmund said this, quote, "The public is practically unaware of the overwhelming responsibility carried out by the Vatican and its Jesuits in the starting of 2 world wars. A situation which may be explained in part by the gigantic finances at the disposition of the Vatican and its Jesuits, giving them power in so many spheres, especially since the last conflict." And there always seems to be another conflict, doesn't there? But let's go back just a little farther. And Abraham Lincoln said this, and he said much about the Jesuits, but I'll read something very quickly here on what he said. He said, the American Civil War, would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. Now, like I mentioned, if you want to go and get some Jesuit quotes from them, they depict themselves as completely opposite. In fact, the history books and all of even the pundits today that are trying to tell us what happened to how Lincoln was killed, what happened in World War I, World War II, what happened in Vietnam, what's going on in Iraq, fails to get to the truth about this organization. And that's what we try to do here. Now, I remember a long time ago when I was discussing Abraham Lincoln and had on a couple authors that wrote some really great books regarding the real truth behind the Jesuit Vatican influence in the assassination of Lincoln. It's all court records. You can pick them up. And it's amazing how they covered this story up. Now, in the history books, when you go to college, you'll never read that. Now, even on, for example, now we have, when I was doing this story, especially with a guy by the name of C.T. Wilcox, who wrote a book definitively, had documents showing perfectly what happened, even documents that were written by a Catholic priest who was basically Lincoln before he became president. Represented this priest who was trying to tell the truth about the Vatican and their sinister influence in trying to overthrow America even back then. And Lincoln got him off on a rape charge, and they remained friends until Lincoln was assassinated. Now, C.T. had documents from this man that were hidden, and he found them in Canada. And it's an incredible story. Now, when I started doing that years ago, all of a sudden there was a flood of Lincoln stories, and a couple guys, on the History Channel, and a couple of, I don't even know who was behind it. It was some big Hollywood producer. And they didn't discredit this story. They just gave you a different version, leaving this out. And I found it interesting that they were trying to drown us out back then. Now, today, you're going to see on Fox News on the right, the right paradigm, Bill O'Reilly has written all of these history books. What's the real killing of Abe Lincoln, the killing of Kennedy, and he doesn't get into the Jesuits. And the reason is he's a Roman Catholic, and even on Ash Wednesday, you'll see him do his show, and he's got those ashes on his forehead. Now, that is completely, again, and he says the spin stops there. He's given you the true story, and it isn't the true story. And that's what I'm getting at when I talk about these Jesuit quotes. And one thing that came to mind to me was this. If you look back in history, and you can go all the way back to the 15th century, there were very notable people, princes, kings, statesmen from all these countries, inventors, very notable people, all the way into the early 1900s, talking openly about the sinister influence of the Jesuit in the United States and what they were going to do here. And right now, as we sit in 2015 or 16, what are we in? Coming on 17? You don't hear any notable people talking about this. You hear people like me. I'm not a notable prince or king. And there's other people, just average Joes like me, that are keeping this truth alive. But you don't hear it from any of these notable people. Where are they? You don't hear anybody in the United Nations. You don't hear anybody that, what do they give out, the Nobel Peace Prizes? They usually go to the biggest warriors known to man. And maybe that's why Bob Dylan, I don't know what his story is, but he didn't want to accept his Nobel Peace Prize this year. He accepted it. He's going to get the $800,000. But he didn't go to the ceremony balking on it, so I don't know what his story is. But what I'm getting at, there's no notable, where's the people from China, the notable people from China, the high-level people, talking about the Jesuits? I can go back in history and find some. Where are the ones in Russia like Dostoevsky? Where are the ones in America? Where's our poor? I can't find one person in a high position that's talking against them. What about the Prime Minister of Italy? What about France? What about Norway? None of them. So what does that tell you? It tells me this. They all work together now. It's silenced. The one world order, which they've always wanted, is coming to fruition, and we're not that far away. And so that's what these quotes are all about. And that's why somebody had emailed me a while back and said, Greg, could you get back to that? Because everybody's forgetting about it. And he was right. He was right. And so that's just my thoughts about these quotes. Now, I do want to get into the main topic of discussion. I'll do that in just 1 second. Okay, let's get into the Pizzagate story and put it into perspective. And we all know what that's about now. But let me tell you, let's go back a ways and really talk about pedophilia in the Catholic Church, child trafficking, and these huge pedophile rings that have grown even bigger today. When I was researching this years ago, I met a police detective named Jim Rothstein, and I'm going to get to a little bit of an interview. We got a lot to cover today, an interview with him, and I'll pull out some things we talked about in 2008 and 2009. But let me go back even farther. When I first learned about this, what was going on really in the catacombs of the Vatican when I worked in Rome during the mid-'80s. And how it all started with me, I was I was not sure what was going on. I didn't know any of this stuff. And so there I was as a journalist, seeing it right in front of my very eyes, watching this huge scandal, and it had nothing to do with pedophilia, but behind the scenes it did. And it was a huge financial scandal, one of the biggest in the history of that church. And it involved all the money laundering and killing of bank presidents and the head of the Vatican Bank. We know Bishop Marcinkus, who was, from my hometown in Chicago, was indicted for bank fraud and then suspicion of murder. He was airlifted to Phoenix, and they paid the Italian government off. And it was a huge story. They connected 150 cardinals to the P2 and other Masonic lodges, which basically is, if you look at canon law, they're supposed to be excommunicated, but that never happened. So, I started seeing all this. And what I remember was how I started to figure this out was there was a book at the time put out called The Messianic Legacy. That was in the late 70s. And I was reading it. And the journalists I happened to get a first glimpse at when they came to Rome. And they turned out, one of the guys is still the head of, I think he's the editor of one of the biggest Masonic magazines in the country, in England, I believe. And this whole thesis was that Jesus didn't die on the cross. The bloodline existed. And the bloodline was carried on by this group called the Prioria di Sion, and their headquarters was in France. And so I said to myself, what was this all about? So they denied that this book said that Jesus never died on the cross, and so on. So I wanted to find out who this guy was. So I went to France and could never find him. And I've told this story before, but I came back and did some more research and found out that the Jesuits were behind it. So I'm thinking to myself, why would they do this? I mean, here I am, not understanding everything. And that was the first glimpse that I had into their deceptive plan. And really the plan is to discredit God, Jesus, any kind of Christianity, and to worship Satan. And all of the things that followed in my life. A girl came to me once with a story about how she witnessed satanic worshiping, child sacrificing in the catacombs of the Vatican. I didn't believe it then. But then other people came forward as I moved forward with this story. And I realized that this is where it all starts. And so it made sense to me that if the people in this country, the leaders of our country, worship this Pope, as we know they do. They brought him into Congress. They let him speak to both houses. He spoke to the UN. He's their leader. I said they have to be involved in this too. And sooner or later, I got to meet a couple of police detectives in New York City who were researching this from the aspect of this child trafficking, these pedophile rings, all these kids missing. Where are they going? And Jim tells a great story, and what I thought I'd do is play a little clip here. Now, somebody took my interviews and they turned them into a 5-part series. And I'm going to play part 2, and let me just give you a little background on Jim. Jim worked Vice, and he was a cop, and he became a detective, and he started to research all of the child trafficking and a lot of the pedophilia going on in New York, where these kids were ending up. And it's an incredible story, and how he was forced out of the New York Police Department. Then he went on his own, and he helped people who, for example, during the 80s, there was a rash of all these paper boys in the Midwest who were getting taken off the route and never seen again. One was Johnny Gosh. And I say if you do the anatomy of that case, and there's several others like it, you'll understand how this operates better. And it's going on today. So when I talk about Pizzagate, Pizzagate is, well, let's just give you my take on it. Where did it come from? WikiLeaks. Who's the head of WikiLeaks? Julian Assange. Julian Assange, I think, is a CIA asset. Otherwise, they would have never allowed him. What's he, an Ecuadorian? You don't think if they wanted him, they couldn't get him out of that Ecuadorian embassy or wherever he is? So this was orchestrated. And they put out all these emails. And, they basically, there were so many damaging ones to Hillary Clinton. She's now saying that's the reason why I didn't get elected, etc., etc. And that's all malarkey. They wanted this out. And some of the emails came from John Podesta, who is basically Hillary Clinton's, he was the campaign manager. He also was chief of staff for Bill Clinton, and he goes deep, and he's a Jesuit. And these emails talked about this, they used all these code words, and it led to this comet ping pong place. And that's where this pedophilia ring was there. And they were talking about pizza means this. And they had pictures. The guy who owns it had pictures of kids in bondage like this. Then what happens is, after this goes out, everybody comes out. The Pope, Hillary Clinton says, all these people that are talking about this are fake news. It's not true. And we have to shut down the internet. And I read to you what the Pope said about that. He called everybody, and he open letter, everybody that did that was a crap eater, and basically was, what did he call it, cocophilia or something? And that means you have a penchant for feces, and you shouldn't, and all these people that are doing this story should be cut off the internet, etc., and you should only talk about good things. And he said, even if there's a scandal, and it's true, you shouldn't cover it. So what it was a attempt to shut down, they're using this as an attempt to shut down any kind of criticism. But we're not going to let them do that, because I laid off Pizzagate because I knew what they were doing. And there's really something much deeper, and it goes all the way back to these pedophile rings that are existing, coming through Washington. The Vatican's involved. It goes right to the Cardinal of New York. At least back when I was talking to Rothstein, he had solid information that Cardinal Spellman was a pedophile, and he used to have little children come to the back of St. Patrick's. So let's get back to this interview, and then there's so much more on this subject. It may take me a couple shows, because I do want to get into this letter that was sent to the Pope by Randy Engel, this journalist. Very interesting, and it really brings Pizzagate together too. It's fascinating when you start reading what he uncovered. And first we're going to start off, though, with this interview I did. It was, I believe, 2009 with Jim Rothstein. Oh, one thing before I do this, I just pulled this up, and I mentioned that Podesta was a Jesuit. Well, I found an article back in February 2001. Let me read a little bit so you get an idea what I mean. Clinton administration chief of staff John D. Podesta, who fashioned an expertise of the intersection of technology and law during his White House years, has accepted an appointment at Georgetown University Law Center that will keep him immersed in the same themes. Georgetown will announce today that Podesta, an alumnus and former instructor at its law center, will rejoin the faculty to teach and help launch a center on law and technology. So basically, you know what Georgetown's all about, and he's a Jesuit, like I said. So I have a feeling the Jesuits are involved in this pedophilia ring, don't you? Somewhere, somehow? Yes. Okay, let me get to this interview with Jim Rothstein. Okay, here we go. Let me pod this up, and we'll listen to Jim Rothstein.
During this investigation, just a brief recap of your story. We've talked about this on my show before, but you were involved in the highest levels of this type of investigation. Now, just recap a little bit about some of the top-level people, where this investigation went. How, one thing we have to emphasize is Morgenthau, who's still the district attorney in New York, who quashed this investigation, showing that there has to be a cover-up at the highest levels. Just recap this so people can understand how it operates. And you even say that it's worse today than it was 25 years ago.
Yes, it is, because you can add the internet to it now, and that makes it simpler, quicker, and really tougher to work. By the way, the good news is Morgenthau's not running for re-election. And okay. I think anybody who in New York is listening to this, make sure you don't put anybody else in other than Crocker Schneider, who I worked with when she was a young district attorney, and I can assure you, you will see a change. The whole thing with Morgenthau, too, was we had already been working on it for years, and at one point we had information with an informant to put a wiretap into one of the biggest pedophile rings operating on an international level, especially into Washington, D.C., and the big businesses. And we went for the wiretap, and it was the best wiretap application I had ever seen. Everything was documented. And I never forget, we went up to his office, me and my partner, Matty Rosenthal, and we had a lieutenant with us, too, and they flat out denied to give us the wiretap order. And then they sent their investigators out and raided the place and seized the files so that we couldn't get them, because these files were the thing that would have capped our investigation, and we could have taken down probably the biggest pedophile operation that ever existed in the world. So that's one part of it. that I was personally involved with and saw what happened. So
I know you had some choice words for Morgenthau. Basically,
yes, we did, but we can't say them on the air.
How did you coexist with those people after that?
We did. It became an all-out effort at that point to stop us, and what they did is they compromised our lead counsel at the time by using some work he had done in what was known as the Huey Mulligan grand jury investigation, which was a corruption investigation, and they compromised our counsel, and that's how they stopped us. So that was when we were with the New York State Select Committee on Crime.
Right. So basically their intentions from Morgenthau on down was to cover up the evidence so that the higher level people would be protected. One of these persons they were protecting was a late Cardinal Spellman. Just recap for our listeners what you found out about him, because there are still people in this country who could not believe that someone wearing a robe like his could be involved in such evil. Go ahead.
Well, that was a very interesting investigation. And on the same point, they yet vilified Father Bruce Ritter, who had done what he was supposed to do. But as far as Spellman went, we very early in our investigations, we found out that he was known as Nellie, and I had one of the pimps that supplied him with the little boys was one of my informants. And at that time, the informant told me, if you ever get trouble or you get any heat from Spellman, here is the name, and he gave me the name of one of the kids that had been molested. In fact, that kid got caught in the Cardinal's residence, and they accused him of being a burglar because when the people came in, he ran off wearing the Cardinal's shoes, and he was arrested. And the next day at the arraignment, naturally, the Cardinal forgave him for being such a how would you say it, a misled youth to go steal his shoes. And that was the end of it. But that was the information I needed to keep him at bay and not bother me. So I never had any trouble with Spellman myself. But we knew all about what it was. Like I say, I had the pedophile that supplied the kids to him.
And they used to call him Nellie in those circles?
Yes, they did.
That was his nickname?
That was his nickname in the pedophile world, yes.
Now, you also mentioned, and this is the connection that I tried to make with the hierarchy of some of the Vatican, and that is their connection to the control of our foreign and domestic policies. You also termed Spellman as one of the most powerful people in New York. And just for our list, from your point of view and in investigations, what kind of power did this man wield behind the scenes?
Okay, I'm going to get to that in the second half hour, and we're going to continue. I got through about 5 minutes of that 9-minute and 44-second clip that someone did. He did a 5-part series on all of my shows back then with Jim, and I appreciate that. So you're going to hear some really good things. And what I'm getting at Pizzagate here, it's just the tip of the iceberg. They wanted it out for another reason. We went back years. Look, this is 2009. And do you think any of the people that picked it up, did the mainstream pick it up like they're doing Pizzagate? No. Did Alex Jones pick it up like they're doing like he's doing Pizzagate? No, they weren't. They didn't want this out back then. Now, you know as well as I do that Alex Jones works for them. He's a gatekeeper, and he's not even Alex Jones. And I can bet on it. I'd lay 99.9% he's Bill Hicks. And people say, "Oh my goodness, Greg, you're going off the deep end." Well, I don't think so. And anyway, who cares who he is? He works for them. And we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this December 14th, 2016 day on our calendar. And before I get back to this interview I did in 2009 with Jim Rothstein, I had this thought at the break. I think what researchers are failing to do, and maybe I can give them some advice. And I'm not saying there aren't great researchers in this area of these pedophile rings, but Jim understood this as well as I did. You have to bring the spiritual together with the secular world here. You can't just look at John Podesta and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. You have to go deeper than that. And then you have to look at what motivates these people to become perverts like this. It's very simple. They're Satanists. They worship Lucifer, and they are involved with the Jesuit order's deception, the Vatican's deception, to take every Christian person and wipe them off the face of the earth, or at least marginalize them, so that God is taken out of the vocabulary of every human being. And you're seeing that happen. God's been taken out of our schools. Their idea is to marginalize, just like I said when I researched that book, The Messianic Legacy, and the Jesuits were behind it, and how they said Christ never died on the cross. He lives, his bloodline still lives today, and all they're doing is marginalize Christianity. And that's their goal, and that is to raise Lucifer up and to marginalize God and Jesus. And that's why they worship Mary and all that garbage. And we get into those discussions as well many times on this show in years past, and we'll do it again. But let's get back to Jim Rothstein, because he has some things to say about the importance of Cardinal Spellman. Now, if you don't know who he is, he's many you youngsters out there. Cardinal Spellman was the Archbishop of New York, and he was also the chaplain in the Vietnam War, and they used to call it Spelly's War. Now, he's also a pedophile, and he's passed away, but this goes on at the high levels of many of these archbishops and bishops and popes and all of this garbage. But anyway, Jim found out about Spellman through his work as a police detective, and in the end, they threatened his life and he had to leave, and then he went on his own and tried to help people who found their children being snatched up into these pedophile rings, and he tried to enlighten the world of how this operates and how it's a huge problem all over the world. Child trafficking, huge, and a lot of money involved, a lot of rich people getting their kicks this way. So let's listen to Jim and talk about Cardinal Spellman, the late Cardinal Spellman.
Well, Cardinal was supposed to be saving souls. What was his real purpose in life?
His real purpose was power. And a very simple story is, one night there was a young rookie cop up on Fifth Avenue on his patrol, and early in the morning, about 2:30 or so, this old guy comes walking down the street and talks to this cop, and he invites the cop in for a cup of coffee. And they go in, and when the cop comes back out, the sergeant's looking for him, and what we used to call, he wrote him up for being off post. So the next night, the young guy is out there again, and here's the old guy again. And the old guy says, well, how are you today? He says, well, not very good. He says, last night when I went in for a coffee, the sergeant wrote me up for being off post. Oh, he says, I'll take care of that. And within a matter of minutes, the patrol car comes and picks this cop up, and they say to him, what the heck is going on here? And he says, why? He says, what did I do wrong? He says, they want you at the station house. So they go to the station house, and here is the police commissioner and everybody, and apologizing to this cop, and he got promoted. You know, they took him off the street and gave him a good job, and the complaint he had against him was gone away, and everything was taken care of. So you can see if a guy like that can handle something so simple, especially inside the police department within minutes, it just shows you the power that he has.
And that was Spellman, the old man he was meeting with, right?
Yes, that was Cardinal Spellman.
Yeah, amazing. Well, listen, why don't we move on to an interesting, we got only 2 minutes before the break, and I just wanted to set this up because I want to talk about this in the next half hour. Behind the scenes of all these pedophile investigations, you found, and you've documented it before, you see this massive corruption at high levels. Behind the scenes you fell into a story that is so amazing, and I wanted to update it for people, and that was putting the Kennedy assassination into perspective and providing solid evidence of how it took place, as well as evidence that still's out there that's in the hands of that's in the hands of certain high-level bishops in the Vatican, that shows that one of the accomplices actually committed the crime, leaving his final words to this bishop that you've tried to get a hold of. Now, a lot of what is in that statement was told to you in when you took this man into custody over trying to kill another accomplice in the Kennedy assassination. And what it boils down to is that he was involved with certain things that really brought his demise. One, he wanted to change the Federal Reserve banking system. Two, the CIA wanted to restructure. Three, he was talking about this monolithic beast that connects with both supposed religious, and then geopolitical organizations.
Okay, I'm back here in 2016, and we went off on a different story there, but it shows you that letter that Jim had shows you the real power behind the scenes of the Vatican, Spellman, and the rest of the bunch, which is even worse today. If you go through the cabinet and all of the people connected to Obama, you will find an amazing story about how they're connected to the Jesuit order. Also, many people in Congress and all over our government, all ties go to them. And I'm telling you, we're going to do the same little study with when Trump puts all his people in place and do an update on that and show you the connections. But let's get back to this pedophile story. Okay, I'm back. It's 2016. It gets confusing because I'm going back to 2009 and showing you how massive this problem is. And when this is the first part of the interview, and Jim is talking about how many of these child services agencies from the states are involved in this child trafficking. And he gets into the Vatican as well. So let's get back to Jim and this story.
Yes, we did. Well, during the time I was a police officer, we had a big thing going between Illinois and Texas. And these kids would end up in foster care, and it was a couple hundred of them ended up shipped down to Texas to some social services network there, and they were funneled into the pedophile world. We also had at another instance where in Minnesota, they had one where when the kids that were in foster care and stuff ended up in these homes, they had one in a place called Sock Center, a girls' home, and we actually had that they were selling the kids to the pimps to be brought into prostitution around the United States, especially New York City. And I have many, many calls where it seems like there's a manual written on how this works. They get into divorce court or somehow get to where they can grab the kids, and then the kids end up into all kinds of different networks. Some of the people are legitimate, but there's a lot of corruption in that, where people have no clue what they're doing, or taking kids and just sending them to homes that are no better, or in most cases worse than where they came from.
Exactly. And what I wanted to emphasize for the next few minutes is this growing problem in all these child services organizations in each state. And what the real problem began when laws were passed that gave financial incentives to states from the feds based on how many children were in their system. So what they started to do when you see this pattern is that they began to just corral as many kids as they can and then trump up abuse charges, fraudulent documents, people lying about what the situation was with the families, just to get kids into their system so that they could keep the system functioning, get more federal money, and then in the case you're talking about, a lot of these kids either end up in abusive foster homes or are funneled into these pedophile rings. Did you ever see, when you were, or since you left the police department, do you see a concerted effort to keep these systems running like this all around the states? And how come people can't stop what's going on with these laws that have been passed that are very wrong?
Well, the people that pass these laws, a lot of them have ulterior motives, and those that don't haven't got a clue what's happening. And people shouldn't allow this. We should stand up for what's right. And you'll find it's awful hard for people to stand up. Many times they are threatened and, that they're going to go to jail for not taking care of their kids and that. But the most important thing to look here is follow the money. Where is the money going? It just goes on and on. The more money they make, the more they got, and they don't really care what happens to the kids in many cases.
Right. And, I just see stories of abuse all over the country in these systems, people talking on my show regarding how kids were taken away for a simple dog bite, how kids were taken away because one parent argued with another child. In the case of certain ministries, like the Alamo ministry, they just raided the place, and now over 35 children are still in custody for the last 8 or 9 months without really solid evidence of abuse. And these state agencies can just walk in, basically, and take these kids. Now, where they end up is another story. Some I've documented have been abused in these foster homes, some even killed, and others somehow are missing and not on the state rolls. In Florida, it was documented by a group there that thousands of children have not been accounted for over the years. They don't know where they're at.
Well, that's
so
right.
I assume they end up in the pedophile rings that you investigate.
Yes, a lot of them do, and I think it would be nice if somebody had the courage to inventory this and do an accounting of each and every child that's ever been in the system and see where they are. I think you'd have one of the biggest scandals in this world. Years ago, they'd just throw them in a foster home of some kind under the guise of an orphanage, and they would, if they were lucky, they survived. And some of probably the worst people I dealt with were victims, and then themselves became the pedophiles and stuff that worked on it that came out of these. And now you've got these kids thrown out, seized by people who have no clue what they're doing, overzealous people who shouldn't even be in the business, and they take these kids and these kids disappear. Who's watching over that? Nobody. And if you bring it up, you're a bad person.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you've called the biggest terrorist threat in this country not what went on after 9/11, but the kidnapping of our children into these pedophile rings. You've dedicated your life to this. As a police officer, you first started out in Vice in New York, and then you worked your way up as a detective. Then you got on the State Crime Task Force to try to eliminate this problem. But tell us why you consider this to be the biggest terrorist threat in our country, even to this day.
Well, that's not hard to figure out. You know, you've got these kids disappearing and dying. It covers quite a different variety of things. And you never, you hear this thing, they're investigating the local authorities, the federal authorities, and then the classic comment, we can't talk about it, it's an ongoing investigation. And people start believing this. And I think I've said this on every show I've ever done with you. The only mother I know that's ever stood up and fought up to the end was Noreen Gosh. She just didn't believe that. She wanted to see what was being done, and when she saw nothing was being done, she understood how the system worked. And it's a classic case. I always refer to her case because of how it worked. And this goes on more and more every day. And any police officer or federal agent who dares investigate these cases to the fullest extent of the law, his career is over with. And what really amazes me why it's terrorism is that people are scared to go ahead and want to know what happened to their kid all across this country. And it's growing and growing and growing, and nothing is being done. Although I've seen lately, for instance, they're doing this federal investigation into the trucking industry with the disappearance of children. Long overdue. There's a number of other things that I just saw the other day. I have a person who's sending me information where they're having these buddy rides with truck drivers for kids. I mean...
Okay, I'm back live in 2016, and just let me make a comment. I did many, many hours of interviews with Jim Rothstein and many hours of interviews with Noreen Gosh, and I can't go through it all right now because it would take up too much time, but go to johnnygosh.com, look up Noreen Gosh, and read about that case. Jim worked on it for a long, long time. And it's a good way to understand how these pedophile rings really work. And one thing that was interesting, and I want to just say I can't find the interview right now. I did with Jim. I don't have time. But we got to a point of talking about it had to do with Cardinal Spellman. And at the time, the Pope before John Paul II, John Paul. And he lasted 33 days in office and was killed. And I happened to be there in Rome to when I make that statement, I'm making it on facts, because if you were there and saw how this took place, he was actually murdered. And so then back in 2000, when I first met Jim, probably in 2006 or 7, we got onto the subject of these pedophile rings in New York. And Jim was saying he was given... he went in and his boss said, you better investigate this Father Ritter on the east side. He has a place called the Covenant House. And we think there's a lot of phony stuff going on there. So Jim and his partner, Matty Rosenthal, took that lead and started to investigate Ritter. And he had this place where he was supposedly taking in kids and helping them get their lives back after they were involved in a lot of these pedophile rings and these problems, these kids that ran away. It was a house to help kids. And what Jim found out was that Ritter was squeaky clean. And basically, there was no funny business going on there. And they began to use Father Ritter as a conduit to really find out where the problems were with Cardinal Spellman and the rest of these rings. What happened one time was the Pope, this was John Paul, it was 10 days before he was killed, called Father Ritter, and Jim was there and talked to him and got on the phone with the Pope. And basically what Pope John Paul was saying is he wanted to stop these pedophile rings, and he knew that Spellman was involved, and he wanted Ritter's help. So guess what happens? He's talking to the Pope. They're trying to figure out a way, and they realize what they're up against here. Spellman and the leaders of New York City at the state, federal, and local levels. 10 days later, Pope John Paul was killed, and Jim had an informant in the Vatican who told him how, what was really, how he really, they said at the Vatican he died of natural causes, etc., etc. But he had an informant in the Vatican that said, no, he was actually murdered. Now, guess what happens? Jim goes back to his bosses and say, we got Ritter here. He's going to help us. They would not allow this to go forward. In the end, Ritter was basically humiliated. The Covenant House they took all the records from there. That was disbanded. Ritter was sent up to New York State, and Jim basically was told by the chaplain after he was, they came to him in a bar with his partner, and they came with money and said, look, here's $1 million if you just forget about all this stuff and go away. He refused to accept that because he figured he was going to be, caught up in a bribery scheme. And then they came to him after that and said, Jim, we're going to let you retire early with full benefits. And the chaplain kind of intimated that if he didn't, he wouldn't see the light of day again. So he retired, and then went on his own to work with people like Noreen Gosch. And then I got a chance to interview him many, many times. So you see what I'm getting at here. This is from the Horse's Man. This is from the police detective. And there's a couple others that I talked to over the years. This Pizzagate thing is a setup to really, it's like fish in the water, honest people catching the bait, and then now maybe having their internet sites taken down, or at least they're on a list now, because what they really want to do is get rid of any of this criticism. These stories that I did way back then, they didn't catch on to the mainstream. Alex Jones wouldn't cover it. In fact, during that period of time, he was totally against anything I said. He said that the Vatican wasn't even involved in anything. They were just these priests. The Vatican had no money. It was really ridiculous, and that told me who he really worked for. Now he's changed his tune a bit. He's talking about saying, Pope Francis is the Antichrist, but he kind of does it in this kind of way that there's this good side of the church and the bad side of the church. When I say this, the whole Vatican organization is the Antichrist system, and there is no good side. Now, of course, there's nuns and priests who don't understand this, and they carry on the good work of helping certain people. Of course, you've got to understand that. But once they do understand this, I've talked to a number of priests who left the Vatican, and they know what's really going on. And some of them have been silenced. So you have a deep problem here. So when you're thinking about Pizzagate, let's think of it in these terms. So I'm going to just lay it out real simple. First of all, Julian Assange opened it up. He's a CIA asset. He was allowed to give that information out. All of a sudden it gets to Podesta, who's now, we've proven he's a Jesuit, but he's taken the heat. And you're seeing that he has all these code words and everything relating to all this supposed pedophilia and child abuse at Comet Ping Pong. They've even had a picture of Obama playing ping pong with some kids there. And if you read into what's going on there, it seems pretty seedy. But it never got any farther than that. Then the Pope comes out and says, everybody that covers this story has a penchant to eat crap, so to speak. And he had his little cocrophilia. Everybody who does this is, a piece of you-know-what. And he said no one should be covering this. The internet should not have this stuff. You don't cover scandals. All you should do is cover good things. Even if scandals are true, then Hillary Clinton comes out and says fake news is the problem, and we have to stop this. It's really causing problems. And you can see the pattern here. Mainstream media even picked it up and called everybody that does it, oh, this doesn't exist. This is crazy. Well, it's not. And it was a kind of a way of, they also to let everyone know this is the world you live in, and this is the way it's going to be. And even though it goes on, you're not going to be able to stop us. It's kind of a slap in the face, isn't it? And what I'm saying is there is solid evidence that this goes all the way to Rome. And we try to show that on this show, because once you understand both the spiritual side of this, what they're trying to do, who they really worship, Lucifer, and then you get into their policies in the political side, you see they all come together for this one world government, one world religion, which is not going to be worshiping God, but worshiping Lucifer, and that's where it's all heading. And come back tomorrow, because I want to get into Randy Engel and this letter he sent to the Pope. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. A big show tomorrow. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.